Go back to Rob, did I make your life miserable?
Make my life?
Yeah.
No.
I just understood. I heard there's some back and forth going on because of my emails.
I think you raised very good.
Did you hear what they said about that? Oh, we've been doing it that way since. You said we've been doing it that way since 2007. We don't follow the rule.
Chris, you're yeah. Call to order our city council meeting with the work session for tonight, which is Wednesday, March 11th, 2020. All members of the council are present, though with the exception of Councilmember Lamb and Councilmember Jacob, who are expected to both be here momentarily. We'll go ahead and get started. First item for work session tonight is a discussion on wastewater facilitated by Corbin Lee. We can wait in awkward silence until he shows up. Well, if he swaps places with you, he's not getting the floor back, because I thought we said you get it until the end.
That's
so,
right. So there you go. Wastewater discussion over.
David, do you know where Corbin is?
Oh. No, let me find Corbin now.
I'm here.
You give me ready. He's not here in 3 minutes. We move to finance, and
that's awesome.
that's all we need.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Well, before Corbin gets here, are you just going to ask me to pass it? This is the order for Sandy. And I'll just make the signature.
All right, we have already begun. Corbin, you're up.
Perfect. Can you switch to my presentation? Go to slide 1 and click start the show. Okay, council. One of the feedback we got that I thought was really spot on is we need to be more clear as staff of what we're asking of the council for these different agenda items that come to the council. For this agenda item, this is a for your information only agenda item. We're not asking anything of the council. This is just something we want you to be aware of and we want you to have in the back of your mind as other issues start to come up. Tim Heron's here. Tim, will you come sit in my seats? I need you to make sure you're chiming in and helping me with this presentation. We want to just make you aware of some challenges we're dealing with the wastewater system and how the wastewater system is impacted by development and development proposals and how development proposals are impacted by the wastewater system, particularly in the southwest part of our city. So this is an outline of the city map. You're all familiar with this. This part of the city is served by the Kearns Improvement District for wastewater. So that whole far northwest corner of the city, we don't have to worry about wastewater. That includes roughly half of the Woods Ranch proposal. It includes that County Island area we've talked about recently. It also includes Ochre Shadows. We don't need to worry about wastewater up there. Special Improvement District covers it. We do cover the entire rest of the city with wastewater services. And you can't see it, but right there underneath your picture is where the sewer treatment facility is, the South Valley Water Reclamation Facility. And the system has this giant trunk line that we've talked about before that runs kind of the length of the Jordan River. When it's in our boundaries, our flows go into it and that continues on south and picks up wastewater flows from South Valley and other special improvement districts. You can leave it up there. I was just kidding around. But the rest of this wastewater system in our city kind of works like if you picture a tree or you picture the circulatory system, we have these big trunk lines that run east to west across the city, and wastewater flows by gravity from smaller smaller pipes near your home and in your neighborhood to larger pipes and collector streets to larger pipes into the arterials, and then east to west downhill to that big trunk line, those two big trunk lines that run along the river. Am I describing it right, Tim? Is that a fair description?
We break up the city into parts, so each trunk line has a section of the city that it covers.
So tonight we want to talk to you primarily about two of these trunk lines, particularly this trunk line stretch that runs the length of New Bingham Highway and this trunk line that goes along 90th South. These two trunk lines service the southwest part of the city. That's why they're important to just share with you tonight. Now, before we get into all of more detail than that, I want to talk about wastewater and ERUs. We've been talking a lot recently about ERUs as it relates to stormwater. ERUs is a number we also use for wastewater. Essentially, it's an equivalent residential unit. So it's a metric of approximately this much wastewater is how much the average home uses. An ERU in wastewater is 341 gallons of water and sewage discharged per day. That's one ERU. Tim, anything else you should say about ERUs?
We just use that as an engineering calculation to help us as the city expands. There's certain ERUs assigned to each land parcel. That's about it.
So, I like one thing I want to emphasize that Tim just said is there's certain ERUs kind of assigned to each parcel of land. The future land use map assumes certain type of land uses all over the city. Whether it's existing land uses and existing zoning or on our far west side, the southwest corner, it is what we would propose, what we as a city would like to see in terms of the land use types in that area that's zoned agricultural currently. That future land use map then drives the decision-making for the wastewater master plan. The wastewater master plan takes that future land use map and makes assumptions about the land use and then assigns ERUs to each parcel based on that land use. So 100 acres, if it's the future land use map says this is going to be residential at 4 units to the acre, we know that 100 acres is going to need 400 ERUs of wastewater capacity. Does that make sense? Then we take the wastewater master plan and develop projects on our wastewater master plan project list to size pipes appropriately for the assumed ERUs. Is that making sense? Tim, am I getting it right? Any questions about that so far? Tim and his staff go so far as mapping this. So this is a map of the southwest corner of the city. It's far more detailed than you can see here, but there's some good examples. For example, we assume this parcel right here will have 272 ERUs based on its acreage and its assigned land use type in the future land use map. This little parcel here will have 23 ERUs, or will need someday 23 ERUs based on the acreage and the land use type from the future land use map. Okay, so back to this southwest corner. We just talked about how it's served by this big trunk line from the 90th South area. That 90th South trunk line serves this. This isn't exact, okay, so don't get too hung up on it, but that 90th South trunk line serves approximately this part of the southwest corner of the city. Tim's my gauge on if I'm getting anything off.
Of the mostly undeveloped, I'm assuming
It also serves
all of
right
that
from the
down line,
earlier
right?
map.
Okay.
It serves all this other stuff. Yeah, but of kind of the undeveloped southwest corner, this area, if something wants to go here, its sewage flows this way and then down 90th South.
Under 90th South in the pipe.
Yes, not down 90th South, under 90th South.
Had me worried.
Important distinction, this is not any.
The other big trunk line goes under New Bingham Highway to 78th South. And underneath 78th South, there's a big wastewater line. There's one that goes down the length of New Bingham Highway. That one serves the rest of that southwest corner. Those two pipes are sized according to the assumed ERUs based on the acreage and the planned land use types for this area. So for example, if we assume this is going to be 100 acres of 4 units to the acre, we assume this area is going to create 400 ERUs of wastewater needs someday in the future when it develops. And so we create a pipe big enough to accommodate that 400 ERUs, plus the ERU capacity in all the other areas that are within that service boundary for that trunk line. Here's some challenges with that. Some of the developments we're seeing now are proposing ERU usages far greater than what we assumed in the future land use map and in the wastewater master plan.
No way.
And that's true, right? So you get it. That's true for, that's not just residential, that's industrial also. Industrial particularly is challenging because ERU usage for an industrial land use could have ERU usages that are way low per acre, like Amazon, for example, or they could have ERU usages which are very, very high on a per acre basis, such as Dannon, or such as a data center that has a high water cooling system or something like that. Industrial land uses in particular are very hard to guess. Tim and his staff do a very good job working with JUB, who are consulting engineers, to say on average, industrial uses are using ERUs per acre at this rate. Tim, any additional comments? Okay. So the capacity in the New Bingham Highway line and the 90th South line were designed for those assumed ERUs for the service areas that flow into those pipes. Now, there may be a little bit of extra capacity in those lines above the assumed values, but not much and not spread equally. So let me explain what I mean by that. If a developer wants to build out a portion of the city, the future land use map assumes this portion of the city is going to have between 1,100 and 1,900 units on it, dwelling units on it. That's currently what's in the future land use map. A development proposal that's coming into the city now is assuming maybe 2,900 dwelling units on that acreage. They can produce a study that says, hey, your sewage pipe has the capacity to develop and allow for 2,900 units here, which is true. As it exists currently, there is 2,900 units, 2,900 ERUs in capacity, but we can't grant that same 50% increase in ERU per acre to all the other parcels as well that exist in that service area. This area, we had an industrial user propose to come into the city to build. They're phenomenal in terms of property tax base per acre, but their request for ERUs for wastewater capacity far exceeds the assumed ERU per acre that was assigned, or assumed, I shouldn't say assigned, that was assumed for that acreage, because it's on the high end of the spectrum for industrial uses. Likewise, we had a proposal for a big industrial user here, phenomenal industrial user if we could get them, but they wanted a lot more ERUs per acre for wastewater service than what was assumed by the future land use map. If we granted even one of those or two of those, it really starts to lock in what can be done with the rest. In other words, you can't bump 50% up in one big area without reducing the others to keep the total capacity by what's allowed in those areas. Or we do something other, we take some other steps. That's the issue. I'm not looking for any solutions. We don't know what the solutions are yet. It's just a constraint I want to make sure the city council is aware of and well versed on. We're wrestling with these kind of questions, and we're going to be coming back to you with some policy questions, like how should that remaining capacity in those transmission lines be apportioned to the different property owners that are out there? Should we assign that ERU value to that parcel? And if so, should we allow that ERU value to be exchanged or transferred from one parcel to the other or from one property owner to the other? If so, what would that look like? How would that work? And it's not even just that easy either, right? How should that remaining capacity be apportioned between the landowners who haven't developed out there and landowners who already have development? For example, what if Dannon came in and said, hey, we want to expand our facility. We don't need more acres, but we're going to run our facility longer, more hours. We're going to do a small addition, and we're going to start discharging 30% more ERUs into the wastewater system than we had been previously. The capacity is constrained by the pipe. How does the trade-off between the apportionment of ERUs and capacity work between an existing landowner, an existing user of that capacity, and a possible future user of that capacity? We don't know. We're just now starting to wrestle with those issues. We've been talking about them for about 6 months. They're not easy. These aren't really easy things to do, and I don't know the cities that are handling this and how they're handling it. We're kind of dealing with some new things here.
So this makes the assumption, and I'm assuming because of the cost, this makes the assumption that we're not going to expand the wastewater down 90th
All right.
or moving.
Great question. You're leading me right into my next slide. Thank you. One last comment before I jump to that next slide. One other capacity issue is that, remember, the capacity in these lines and the ERUs and the assumed ERUs does nothing for land outside of the city's boundaries. So if we want to annex further west, if someone wants to develop outside of our boundaries to the west, the wastewater capacity in these lines wasn't considered. Tim, am I still on track?
Yes.
Any additional comments?
Quick questions.
So
Yeah, what about the legal, does that open us up for a legal fight if we did grant, let's say, one of those 4 zones, the increase that they're requesting? Somebody else have a legal argument to say, hey, you just killed my property value because now I can't sell it for what I was going to put my money.
right, that factory that needs the extra ERUs, I wanted it here. When you got it over there, now I'm constrained to have to be a warehouse with a single toilet or something like that, right? That's the,
Right, or I can't develop the high density apartments on my property because you built them on your property and now you just killed my property.
right, we don't know.
Excuse me, there's a tried and true philosophy that goes around that first to develop has the most options. And if you hold on too long, you're going to lose options. And that's just kind of a fact of limited space and geography.
So Kelvin, to your earlier question, there's some opportunities and there are some options. I've been talking about this constraint as if it's fixed and locked. It's not perfectly fixed and locked. There's some possibilities, but all of them will potentially be painful. We could get aggressive on ERU caps and encourage wastewater capacity conservation. For example, what would that look like? We could require new development in this area to use low flow toilets, those types of things, right? So that 100 acres, you could get a bump in ERUs or a bump in units of 25%. but still create the same amount of ERUs if you required everyone in that 100 acres to use low flow toilets or something like that. I don't know what that would look like. We have no idea, okay?
What do we consider our general land use now?
We don't know if we could create a transferable entitlement to ERUs and what that would look like. We have no idea. We have been doing some really rough cost estimating of the cost to increase the capacity in those transmission lines. And I can tell you two things. It's very expensive. And if you thought 70th South was disruptive, this would be even more disruptive.
Let's just work up 90. Nobody uses it.
We're brainstorming. Tim and his staff
Let's do some names.
are brainstorming all kinds of ways to possibly transfer that capacity to other areas. Can you, for example, can you take some of that capacity that can go from down 90th and transfer it down the New Bingham line, or vice versa? Because there is a point where New Bingham and 90th are close to one another. Can you transfer that New Bingham line capacity all the way down to a different, think of like river drainages, right? Is there a way to transfer from one drainage to the next drainage? We don't know. There's not a super easy way to do that, but we're considering those kinds of
Your
things.
third bullet point F has been required by developers in Boise.
Expanding the capacity.
No, third up, develop wastewater scalping plant and water reuse plant. That's where my nephew lives. That's required by their development. They had to do
They
it.
had to do it. Yeah, it's one of the things we're looking at. A wastewater scalping plant. What a wastewater scalping plant is it's a small sewage treatment plant that captures the wastewater before it goes all the way down the system to the main sewage treatment plant. Captures it, treats it, and then can pump it out either into a secondary water system, into a creek because it's clean water at that point. You can reuse it. You could. It's essentially a water reuse solution. Very innovative, very expensive. Tim's staff is working on some ideas associated with that. What that would look like, what would be required, how much it cost.
Some of the newer data centers have done that, recycle plants on site.
Even like Dan and I think does a bit of that, right? They try to get, water's expensive and try to get as much use out of that water as possible. We're looking at ways to create downstream capacity. Can we create more capacity at the top of the system by encouraging capacity and conservation throughout the entire system? Tim, chime in. What am I forgetting? What else are you doing?
A lot of the options are cost driven. So a wastewater treatment plant would be more expensive than upsizing a pipeline down 90. However, a wastewater plant on the west side of the city could provide needed secondary water to the west portion of the city. If we pump it, if we build a pipeline instead, then that water could be used for the Jordan Valley plant to reuse it. Then we have to pump it back up to the west side of the city. So there are all kinds of scenarios that we can look at. None of them are inexpensive.
Okay, at the start I mentioned, I'm not asking you to do anything. We're not looking for any direction right now. We just want to scare you.
Thanks for coming.
Kaylee,
We should
what is your
No,
son
but-
called? Is that what you said? Nephew, how do they work with their developers help pay for it?
The developer had to pay for it.
I like that.
It's in the mountains. It's in the foothills.
It's probably in an
Well,
area
the
that had
developer has to pay for it,
no
but in the
sewer
end-
service at all.
The person that buys pays for it, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
My nephew's helping pay
Yeah.
for it.
That'll,
Exactly.
But they also get the water, right? So they don't,
They're not passing the cost on to someone else.
that'll go a long way, because they'll argue for density, which requires them to do that, which means the houses cost more, but they're gonna argue density is for affordable housing, which makes the housing less affordable.
Density doesn't mean affordable.
I know, that's the argument
Yes, it
here,
is,
right?
right?
It's a challenging part of the city. That southwest corner of the city has two big challenges as I see it. It has the opportunity of all this open land, but it's the hardest part and the most expensive part of the city to get water to. And it's the hardest and most expensive part of the city to get wastewater from. Is that fair, Tim, is that fair to say?
But to your point, Corbin, is that if we look at, and I'm just gonna use, because we know we're talking that one piece of property that we've got 1,900 to go to 29, we're talking about Jones Ranch. It's already cleared the planning commission and coming to us at some point in time. If we approve that, that limits the ERUs in the rest of that part of the,
Unless we do something else.
unless we do something else, or we do something as part of that development with the master development agreement or something.
Or they can develop all they want up to the ERUs we have provided already, right?
Right, that's one of the things that's one of the things I think we need to start considering is, are we saying we haven't cared for, to my knowledge, a fixed ERUs to acres. David, is that accurate? I don't know if we need to go that route or not, but I think that's something that needs to be in the back of your mind.
But we gotta start talking about it and looking at it. Is it that we're gonna be up against that here? I'm gonna say we're gonna be up against that in 6 months to a year. We probably ought to look at our policies and where we wanna go with that.
As the council looks at the future land use map, it would be helpful to have that sort of constraint called out to us. So it's not just, let's arrange the colors so they all look pretty. But realize that there's an impact because people do plan, and Dave Murphy spends hundreds of millions of dollars based on those pretty colors. And it would be helpful to have that tied back to the future land use map so that it's kind of solidified in the council's mind that there are ramifications to decisions that are being made.
Very good point. So, any other questions? Tim, any other comments? Brian, anything is your department, anything else?
I think you touched on everything.
All right, thank you, council.
Next up, we have our budget conversation with Denise. While you're-
That good news.
Council Chair, can I
Hey,
interrupt
thanks,
for just a
Corbin.
second?
Would you like me to time?
Well, for a minute,
Someone want us.
just so you're aware, because of the warm temperatures outside, the building has not been switched over to cooling mode. You can't cool these rooms cooler than what it is outside. In fact, you can't even get the outside temperature. So we're doing the best we can in here in the other room today, but we don't want to make the switch over yet. Because Monday they're forecasting snow. If we make the switch over now, we wouldn't have heat on Monday. So we are lowering as much as we can. We got the air moving. So it's gonna be a rough day today. Just next week will be nice.
You have the ability to have it on both.
They have to physically change the pipes to do that.
So, you know, back in the
Before the
80s, they
summer's
didn't have
over,
that
that'll be
technology.
changed and those pipes will be.
Well,
Valves were-
so valves were unheard of.
Valves are such old school, or
Yes.
such new school technology.
The city hall turned what, 25, 2 years ago?
30.
It was it's 1993, it was like the
That's a big
ribbon cutting,
turn.
but it was.
They didn't know what a valve was, but way back when in those days.
So,
Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit tonight about the general fund, not so much about the other funds, we'll touch on those later, but we're gonna go over some things that we're gonna include in your budget document that you've never seen before. First, so our agenda, we're gonna go over the budget addendum, which you've probably never seen before, and we'll show you what that means. We're gonna go over the consolidated fee schedule, because we're gonna include the fee schedule to be adopted with the budget, because those assumptions are included in the budget, right? Fund types, what kind of, we use this lingo all the time, enterprise funds, proprietary funds, internal service funds, what do they mean? What are their purposes, what are their functions? And then we'll go over general fund revenue, a general fund overview, and then we're gonna ask you for some guidance on how to prepare this budget for the general fund and for personnel. So we're gonna need some input from you during this presentation as well. So a budget addendum, an addendum has a purpose, and the purpose of it is to stop all the spring and summer public hearings that we do one after another for things that we're donating or services that are going on. So public hearings are required before the city waives fees, donates services, or provides funds or properties to nonprofit entities. To avoid the need for separate hearings throughout the year, the mayor's budget includes the following annual or one-time requests. These are just some suggested ones. In addition to these, we would also list if our staff donates time toward a nonprofit. None of these are fixed. This is just an idea of what it would look like.
So the West Jordan Jazz Bank could be swapped out for like the West Jordan Jazz Band.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, wow.
If you want.
Maybe,
I'd
but
rather
I
have
like
West
the
Jordan
bank
Jazz.
because it's a money thing. That's awesome. Thank you. Spell check did not catch that.
It's not spelled wrong.
It's not. Is it? All right, so these are some ideas. That's why I have example stamped on here. We also would like, where I've been before, if the fire department works with a burn camp, or if they donate time for a chili cook-off, or if they donate time or resources to, or attend certain things, then those would be listed. You could approve them all at once. You could pull them off if you disagree with the donation. But this would allow like the Little League softball team or baseball that comes and asks for the use of our fields, or soccer, or whoever else is asking for those donations to all be at one place, one time.
So just to clarify, would there be one public hearing just for this batch that's separate from the rest of the budget?
We can do that, yes.
Personally, that would be my preference, because if we were to lump this in with everything else in the budget, I think this would get totally overlooked. So I personally would like to see this separate.
I do not have a problem doing that at all. So, but it would be a separate public hearing and a one-time public hearing. So it'd be so much easier for us to keep track of those things that we're contributing towards. Okay, so that's the purpose of a budget addendum. This is, for instance, this is Murray City's police and fire departments and what they do, but we would do our own. So I've got Chief Wallentyne and Chief Maxfield working on this list, and they're kind of excited to be able to show off some of the things that they do because you don't see those on the backside as well. And neither does our community, to know that we're out there a little more than maybe just for those calls for service. Okay, so any questions about the budget addendum and its purpose and what we
Thank
would
you.
do with them?
That's awesome.
Good, little efficiency. Doesn't save money, but it's an efficiency. All right, the next one we're gonna go through is we're gonna include the consolidated fee schedule in your budget, because a lot of the things that we're assuming are based on that consolidated fee schedule. So I gave you a separate document that I created. This is our current fee schedule, okay? It looks very different than what you've seen before. Hopefully it's readable, more readable. But it's by category and it's alphabetized. So if you wanna know how much does a dog license cost, you're gonna go to Animal Services on the first page and go to licensing, and you can see animal licenses for an altered. I've always wondered what an altered cat looks like, but an altered cat or dog is $8 a year, right? So it's really easy for us to see. I know this is funny terminology today,
I just imagine the Photoshopping.
right?
You could do
Yeah, I could see some memes. But this hopefully is really easy to use.
I have a request in a second.
Okay, so this is all of our fees as they currently stand. On page number, there's an addendum. Page number 24 begins our appendix. On the appendix, it shows you the last time that fee was changed by the council or adopted by the council. You'll see a lot of these are pre-2006,
Okay.
which is a long time ago, right? Not as old as the building, but pretty close.
Wow. So before Christmas on the calendar.
Right? Yeah.
Almost.
You'll also see next to them, there are columns for an adopted fee increase. This would be where we anticipate inflationary increases to a fee or fees that you know are going to increase. So currently this schedule reflects what you adopted when you adopted the Raftella study. We're redoing all of our assumptions and we'll bring you a new consolidated fee schedule that has our own assumptions. And you can say yes or no to whether you agree with those increases or not, and whether you agree with those fee changes. We will definitely call out the fee changes, so you'll see anything that we've changed. But this would be the document that will be included in the budget as well.
Okay, so now my,
Okay, tell me what you want.
tell me if this is way too much work, and if it is, I'll do it myself, and it'll be.
No, it's fine.
It'll be ugly and you won't want to see it, but.
No.
I would like to see what the annual revenue is from each fee.
Whoa.
So,
He
yeah,
said
I
he'd
told
just
you,
do it
it's too much
himself.
work.
Let him do it himself. Get Mel a volunteer.
It's in the budget, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
yeah.
It's
It
in the
is.
budget, so if we can
Maybe
match
if I
up
could
like,
tie it out to account number that we use for that?
like how much we collect on cremation of animals 0 to 25 pounds in a given year.
I didn't even know you were cremated.
That might be a little cumbersome to do, but if you want to do work, we'd be happy to.
Let's do that.
Yeah. I
But yes,
just-
no, we can call out like where it's
Just so
included
we
in the
can
budget.
see like what the material impact of changing a fee is. So if I say, I think we haven't adjusted, pick a fee, we haven't adjusted.
Like police false alarm response.
Yeah, we haven't
Do we-
adjusted, the Pioneer Hall rental fee in 15 years. If we doubled that, what would that mean for our city revenue? Are we gonna go from, 100,000 a year to 200,000, or are we going from $20 to $30? I mean, what are we doing? You know what I mean?
Do we capture data at that granular of a level, like when somebody
Not
pays
quite at
their
that
vendor
level.
fee for, when somebody comes and pays their business license fee for a vending machine? Does it get recorded just as business license, or does it get recorded as business license for a vending machine?
That particular instance, we can pull that data out of the business licensing module. But how many animals we cremate might be a little more challenging. But I know that we could say that we capture all of the animal services revenue, and overall, we would be looking at the fees to be apportioned through that. Does that make sense? So we're gonna look at animal control services, and we're gonna look at cost recovery. So this is what animal control services are, this is how much revenue we receive. We think we should be receiving 10% more revenue than we're currently receiving, so we'll increase all of them by the same percentage versus and a cost recovery. We look at certain services and say, how much does it really cost us to provide that service? And we may be based on that as well.
Well, in conjunction with that as well, how many licenses might be given in a certain area? Let's say, for instance, it used to be $40 for a home-based business, now it's $0. How many licenses
What did
are
that
there
do to
out
us?
there? And what is the economic impact of not charging those fees?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll do our best to give you some good information on that.
I just want to know what the effect is. I'm thinking policy decision wise, if we want to make a policy that says we want to attract businesses, we're going to lower the business license fee, we're going to make up that revenue somewhere else here. I want to know, where that is. I know we pulled it before, like on business license fees, right? When we were looking at the crazy studies that we were looking at before, that we said if we lower it on these businesses, we have to raise it on those businesses to come out even, or whatever it was,
Like the waters.
Right, like the water rates, exactly the same kind of thing. So if we lower it for, like animal services, if we lowered it for cremations, then we increased it for impound fees for unlicensed animals or whatever. How do I know how much I have to raise the one to get rid of the other if we decide that, the city really shouldn't charge for that, or maybe this is a service that
Those are
could cost
great
more?
conversations, and those are policy settings, so you're absolutely right. At the highest policy level for consolidated fee schedules, it would be, as a council, these particular services should be full cost recovery.
Right.
These particular services, we want to subsidize because we see a benefit to the community, right? So, for instance, animal cremation, right? It's a benefit to our community not to have people just drop their dead animals in the garbage can, right? So it's much better for us if we provide a service that's subsidized to some extent. But at what level did you want to subsidize it, or do you want to subsidize it?
Right.
So those are good conversations that we should have as we look at our fees.
Logistically, to try and get to the point that you're suggesting,
That would take
that
another
that'd be a
person.
big ask. It'd basically be installing like a point of sale system for the city that intertwines 100% with our finance system to give us a good data
Granular.
warehouse
Yeah.
to extrapolate that data from. And
The more that we get
it's
electronic
a
on,
good suggestion, but that's an expensive big ask. When we went through the ERP evaluation last time, I really don't know that what was the solution that was selected that support that.
Well, and as we become more technology oriented, there are solutions out there that allow the users to come in and pay the fee, and it would be called out because they're doing the work, right? They're entering what it is they're paying for and how they paid it. So that kind of information gets much more granular and available the more technology that we use to receive payments. So we'll look at all that.
Just tossing that out there as a wish list item.
Okay.
I'll put it on a green sheet that we can deny later.
Okay, that sounds good. We like that.
You can put my name next to it, because that'd be fun.
Look at me, I'm like going backwards. I just kept pushing the button and no one said a word. All right.
Weren't paying attention.
You're okay with that?
Hey,
Get to the,
one other comment is
Yes.
that I think Councilmember Pack mentioned this, but for example, I'm looking at the
oh
business
my gosh,
license.
I'm not even touching it. Alan, it's you.
Oh, don't mess with her.
I'm like,
Now,
I am not doing that.
She's all leaning on it.
but for example, it's got on the fee schedule, the home occupation business license. Well, if we're not gonna charge on that, we should really even be on the fee schedule.
It should because it's something that's available to our city and we'll put on there the question.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that.
So as far as timing goes, will that fee schedule be brought to us with the rest of the budget? Or will it be done sooner? Because in years past, we tried to do this earlier,
Mhm.
so council could finalize what those fees would be so that there were fixed amounts going into the regular budget rather than working off assumptions until the last minute.
We're working quickly. We're gonna get them to you as quick as possible. I'd probably say the first part of May, but no later than that.
All right, so it's not, it'll be before the final budget,
Oh, yeah.
not altogether.
Yeah, no, it's what during your review process.
Cool.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions? All right, let's go over fund types. There's a lot of terminology that we're using that maybe some people aren't familiar with. So here's a reference for you and a printed, and you'll have it available to you in the future as well. So the general fund is going to be in dark green as we go through this process or through these slides. It's the chief operating fund for the government. It's all tax supported. Okay, there are some charges for service, but it's a cost recovery. And there's limited reserves allowed. There are laws from the state that tell us how much we can keep in reserves to support the general fund. There's special revenue funds, and those are special revenue, specific revenue sources committed to a specific purpose. A really good example is Class C road funds. They're dedicated for the maintenance of Class C roads only. So we bring in that, we put it in a Class C fund, we hold it, we spend it on its specific purpose, and we keep that balance moving so that it's really easy. Police impact fees, we do the same thing. Fire impact fees, those kinds of things. Special revenue funds, and we'll give you a list of what those are. Capital projects funds, those are restricted by the state and by this fund type to the acquisition or construction of capital facilities or assets for the government. They are not allowed to support enterprise or internal service funds at all. So a water fund could not be supported with money out of another capital project fund. And there is no reserve restriction. So we could continue to build our reserves in the capital until such time as we want to spend it on those improvements. We don't seem to have that problem, but it is something that's available to us, okay? Enterprise funds, these are the opposite side of the spectrum, right? These are all not intended to work like a business. These are tended to be tax supported. They tend to be servicing in the community, things that a private sector business would not otherwise do because they don't make money. The other side tends to be things that are more business-like, okay? So an enterprise fund is very similar to a business. It has a cash flow statement, it has an income statement, it has net revenues, those kinds of things. It's focused on operating income, net position. Alan, get your paper off of there. And then internal service funds are different. Those provide goods and services to other funds on a cost reimbursement basis, and it's focused on cost recovery, as well as we can keep some reserves in those funds to be able to replace things in the future. So it's similar to a capital project fund. So which funds are like this? So you'll see the colors are the same. So you have our city overall, and then you have the government funds and you have proprietary funds. Those blue ones are business type activities. The green ones are tax supported nonprofit kind of activities. So we have the general fund, and then we have our special revenue funds, the RDA, the MBA, Class C, CDBG grant, Highlands Special Improvement, Made Special Improvement, and Fairway Special Recreation District. Those are our special revenue funds. In addition, I've created 2 more. There's a police impact fee fund over here and a fire impact fee fund as well. Our capital project funds are roads, buildings, and parks. Okay, so that's where we kind of do all those big projects that are supported by the tax base and by impact fees. Proprietary funds are water, solid waste, street lights, wastewater, and stormwater, just the business type funds, utilities. And internal service funds, we have fleet, IT, and we have risk. Now, the city really hasn't been using the internal service funds as they should be used. We will be using them more like they're supposed to be in this next budget. So you'll see some real big changes in those. It's kind of just changing money from one hand to another, but we would like to be able to have those reported differently. Like IT replacement, the IT staff is in the general fund, and yet there's money over there for just hardware. It would be much better if we had an IT internal service fund that would have the staff and all the hardware in one place, and it runs kind of like a business. It's just disaster recovery to the people that they service. Are they servicing the water fund? A lot with the SCADA system. Are they servicing the solid waste fund? Well, maybe not as much, right? So that would be what that's based on. All right, any questions about funds or fund types? Wow, I was gonna say, I know, what happened there?
Is it cooler in that room?
What happened?
It is cool right now.
The coronavirus containment room?
I'll cut them.
All right. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go over general fund revenues. This is going to set the baseline for how we're going to prepare the budget, kind of prepare you for how the budget is playing out right now. So this is the last 2 years of actuals, are the first 2 columns. So at the top would be what we call baseline revenue or ongoing revenue, right? Things that are really stable. So in essence, we had property tax, sales tax, franchise tax, license and fee, permits, fees. These are the charges for service, fines, and then other revenue tends to be stuff like donations and interest income, sundry revenue. There's all kinds of like little things that just come up into other revenue. One-time revenue would be grants that we're receiving, VOCA grants, VALA grants, COPS grants, all of those kinds of things outside of CDBG. And land sale, I wanted to call that out because there's a big swing here and it's hard for us to understand why that swing unless we call it right out. So you can see property tax. This is where Councilman Jacob, I took your advice. So here you go, ready?
It does happen.
It does, telling the story, right? How did we get where we are, right? So baseline revenue, once something changes permanently, that baseline is reset, right? So our baseline revenue in 2018, $50,395,000. See right here. Okay. Nothing happened. That's our baseline. We set our baseline. I rounded just for reasons. Then you did a property tax increase to fund some additional officers, right? So you added $2.5 million of property tax that year. It became a stable revenue source, an ongoing revenue. We also got legislation that introduced that 4th quarter of a quarter that's dedicated to transportation. It was actually initiated in 2019, but we didn't receive it until 2020, this year. So those would be 2 new revenues, right? They reset our baseline, adding those revenues to them. Then we had some growth. So in 2019, we had some sales tax growth of about $890,000. In 2020, I'm estimating we're going to have some sales tax growth of about $850,000. We had some property tax growth during 2020 or 2020, and our permits are up because of all of the big projects that have come in, like the Amazon project, which really boosted our permit revenue. That's more one-time revenue, and so you'll see in 2021, I'm going to reset that because we're not going to anticipate that same revenue the next year, right? And then we had some losses, and we will continue to see some losses. Franchise tax, utilities and telecom. We're seeing those both go down. Utilities because of increased energy efficiencies as home builders are putting in energy efficient appliances and windows and doors, and even people that are remodeling are doing the same thing. And then increased solar use as well, increased HVAC systems. All of those things are pushing energy sales down, which reduces our amount of revenue as well. And telecom is decreasing because people are disconnecting their landlines, which was an easy revenue source because it was really traceable. Cell phones aren't as traceable, and they tend to have a lot of leakage. So, for instance, I have, I don't know, a lot of people on my cell phone plan, but they all don't live in the city I live in, right? One of them lives actually in a totally different state, but we can capture that telecom tax
You're
because
nice.
it comes to my, I know, huh?
Oh, yeah.
I'm a nice mom. It comes to the bill comes to my house, and so that tax is on my bill. But there's a lot of places that leakage occurs, right? So if there's people that live in West Jordan and they live in another city, we don't get the telecom tax. Other revenue we're seeing this year go down, and then we have lost the contract with Murray City for animal services. That's
They
going
say we
to,
lost. Did they get their own or did they go with someone else?
they went with Salt Lake County.
Yeah.
And the reason is they wanted to hand over their building, which is in a really bad shape, to whoever was providing the service, and we were not interested in taking over their building.
It would cost us more than that.
It would have cost us a lot more than it was worth. So we have lost that contract, so that's kind of made revenue dip. So you'll see what's happened here, right? So Zach, I hope this helps tell the story.
This is awesome.
Where was our baseline? We reset it to $53.8 million. Reset to 53.8, add more revenue, add more revenue, add more revenue, reset at 56,775, reduce that revenue for Amazon permits, and reduce for these things that are not going to be coming in next year. And you can see our revenue is actually lower next year than it was this year. So it's quite the challenge, right?
This is
Because we know
before
expenses are not going to do the same thing.
Coronavirus.
And I know this is before that, which is also why you will see I did not put a number under sales tax growth. Things are slowing down tremendously. Supply chains are changing. Consumer spending is changing. We talked earlier before coronavirus even happened, or COVID-19, about presidential election years and instabilities in the markets. And now we're seeing that very quickly. And it really doesn't have to do as much with an election, although some of it may, as it does with the COVID-19 and some other challenges that we're having as well with oil pricing, right? The markets are changing. That's not a time for us to really rely on growth. We need to kind of just set back and sit where we probably know we're going to get revenue, which is the same as this year. So I'm not going to anticipate sales tax growth in the budget. And if we do find some, then that will contribute to capital. All right, challenges. I said, we just talked about them. Sales tax is the most vulnerable revenue source. And I don't know why I said do, but consider budget to the prior year actual or less than 2% increase. So this is where we would like some interaction from the council. Would you support us setting sales tax to what we believe we're going to receive this fiscal year? Or would you ask that we actually anticipate or budget a 2% increase? We are seeing an average in the past of about 5 and 5.5% the last 2 fiscal years. But with this market, I just would like to hear what council input is.
Dollar wise, what does that translate into? Like, how much sales tax do we bring in, and then what would 2% that be?
$22.9 million is our sales tax revenue.
So,
yeah. So from your silence, I'm going to assume we're going to keep it stable.
Can I just say one thing? Yeah, according to the best practices, budget policies you laid out last week, we want to estimate our revenues conservatively. It's far better to estimate our revenues conservatively and have them not hit the mark than if we estimate aggressively and they don't miss the mark. We do mid-year budget adjustments. A lot more painful.
yeah, but on the flip side, if we say, let's just keep it where it's at, and we do see a 2% increase, that's just over $450,000. So if we say things are really tight, therefore we need to raise property taxes by $450,000, but then the revenue comes in anyway, that's not a good situation for us to be in either.
The practice I'm used to is we estimate revenues conservatively. If that year anything in the ongoing revenue comes in ahead of what the estimate was, that creates one-time revenue for the next budget year to go into your capital project accounts and you set the new base up. And so you're always replenishing those capital project accounts through revenues that are coming in a little bit higher than estimated. In the years, heaven forbid, you have a recession and the revenue comes in lower than estimated or lower than really anticipated, but it meets your conservative estimate, you still have the money to fund your ongoing commitments.
Yeah, but that's not the scenario we're looking at this year, where there's already how, 2 million is the gap that we have right now?
We'll get to the gap that's bigger than that now.
Here's,
I want it to be as
We have
close.
about a $4.5 million gap right now.
I'd like to see it be as close to actual as possible. I know that's really hard, but
No,
if we,
I'm pretty good at
if we think it's been
estimates.
5% in the past and therefore maybe 2%, I'd rather see 2% estimated than 0. Because in the past, we haven't had a good level of comfort with the budget, and there have been some very unfortunate practices that have become standard. For example, assuming, oh, we're going to see a $2 million savings in personnel turnover, so we're going to go ahead and budget with a $2 million deficit. I'd rather see us have numbers that we can trust rather than say there's a huge gap, we need to put the burden on the residents and then come to find out, oh, well, we were way too conservative in our estimates.
I'm gonna have to tell you, I'm leaning the other way. And the reason why I'm leaning the other way is that I see, I'll use some specific business names, but I see, we know that Target's moving.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that's gonna, and unless we've got, and I don't think economic development's got a great big retailer waiting for Target to move out, to move in. You know, I know that we've got a couple other things that have moved into the city that we haven't seen, you know, with like Walker Edison moving in over in the Shopko building and what that'll generate as far as any sales tax, if any, if they have a store out front or whatever. But knowing that there's that shift, that there's going to be some of that shift, I think I might go with a 0.5% increase or a 1%, but I wouldn't go anymore because I'm leaning the other way. I think that we're going to go through a couple of things with the shifts in a couple of these stores in the city that it concerns me with sales tax revenue, and I don't want to end up, if we overestimate and then we, you know, like I don't want to do a mid-year budget correction. I really don't. I think that's going to be more painful than what we need to do up front. That's just me, but if we can come something in the middle, maybe, but I don't know.
I think there are too many things pointing to a sales tax decrease. So for me, I'm comfortable at doing what you think is not thinking we'll have an increase, because I don't think we will. I think we're going to possibly see a decrease.
Yeah, there's macro forces at work here and there's micro forces at work here, right? There's the micro forces Kelvin, they're specific to our city that Kelvin mentioned. And then there's the macro forces, the global issues, the nationwide economic issues, presidential election year, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't matter who is elected. It's gonna be bad for the economy. It's not gonna be good anymore either because he's losing. I can't do Biden.
You just stare there.
Let's not get into politics.
Anyway.
We're talking finance.
Are we? Anyway, so what I'm saying is there's two different factors working. We need to consider both. So nobody's wrong. You're both right. It's just a matter of which way do you want to lean to. Which I don't guesstimate it. So
Okay.
I agree with the principles that Chris is saying about I don't want to shift burden to property tax.
And I agree with
In
you.
a different year, in a
We're
different
being
scenario, I'd agree too.
Right.
It's just
In the past,
strange,
though,
I think
where-
it's going to be.
What was the presentation we had last time? We budgeted at an $8 million deficit, but we still had a $400,000 surplus. I want to be able to trust the numbers and then make a policy decision saying, we think it's going to come out here, but as a council, we want a safety buffer. I don't want to try and manipulate the numbers to get somewhere else. I want numbers that I can trust and have confidence in. So whatever's as close, if we really think it's going to come out at 2%, I'd rather see the 2% than the 0. And then we can say, okay, well, this is still close. What would you like to do with that? I want something I can trust.
Haven't had that in the past.
Hopefully you'll get this now. So this is kind of our franchise fees. Our growth in the 2021 budget, we're gonna say from our estimates, gonna be down 2.9%. Budget to budget, it was down 9.9%, but you'll see that these are falling as you know, as they go. So I think that number is strong as well. So this is kind of our picture of our baseline revenue, just kind of a visual to see where we've been, how we got there. Hopefully telling the story. All right, general fund. This is a little more challenging. This is exactly what you just asked for. We're at a $5.2 million deficit right now. So if we set those baseline revenues at 56.4 million, because we've got some grant revenue that we know about. So we've got the VOCA grant, VALA grant, we've got a COPS grant. The things I know have already been awarded and I've got the money in hand. Or not in hand, but committed to us. Personnel costs, we have identified a lot as the last month has gone on. We've been working with departments on creating some efficiencies. We've actually been able to hold the personnel cost right at what it was budgeted for last year, including some of the increases that are that we'll be going over here in just a few moments. But we're holding the line on personnel, which is our largest expense. But that's pretty much as much work as we can do. Otherwise, we're looking at changing service levels because that would be operations, transfers out. And I think I might have this on the slide, but transfers out, that $1.9 million transfer out is representative of that fourth quarter of a quarter sales tax that was dedicated to transportation. One of the options would be not to transfer that out to roads capital, but instead to keep it and have it fund the streets department. That would alleviate $1.9 million of this deficit. Philosophically, is that what you want? Or do we do a 50-50? We did 50-50 last year, or this fiscal year, sorry, that we're in right now. However, we are falling behind on our road maintenance and the level of our roads are deteriorating and we're not able to keep up with that. That sales tax is dedicated for that exact reason. And, you know, are we going to be using it for the right purpose? We could legally do either. There is not a problem with us funding our streets department with that money. Philosophically, that would be your call on what we want to do with that, okay? Debt service, that's fixed. We can't change anything. And then allocated service is actually bringing in money to the city from the other funds. So it's time and personnel spent supporting all the other funds, and then they contribute back to the general funds that actually contributes. If we didn't do that, we would be in a really not a good situation. So right now our expenses are estimated at $61.6 million. We have revenues of 56.4. What's that look like? As far as expense goes, you can see 65% of this, and that's less that allocated services, is all personnel cost. That's very lean, very, very lean. You will see an efficient city at 70%. Most cities are at 80 to 85%. So this tells me we're struggling. Okay.
Struggling with what?
Operations and
Not so much lean per se,
People.
but understaffed.
people.
What about operations? What does that sit as?
Typically, what I'm seeing is when I'm doing an analysis, and we're going to go over this in a minute, we'll show you personnel count. But you're going to see Public Works is probably the leanest organization that you have, and they haven't been, their staff hasn't been increased for almost a decade, and they're just been ignored. So,
Well, I don't want to use the word ignored. but
okay, sorry.
Yeah.
They haven't been able to be
A
funded
little bit
because you've been fixing other things, right? I mean, you had other issues that were larger. So I apologize for that. That was probably not the right word.
But Brian might like it.
Brian's happy.
Well, I think most of the organizations say they've been ignored, but
Right. So this is revenue to expenses. So you can see the blue lines are exceeding the light blue lines, which is not where we want to be. Actuals tend to come in a little better. However, that was under different city administration and management. And I think that you're going to see a lot of change in retention. Right now, I do not have a vacancy in the fire department. Good job, Chief Maxfield. He's changed that culture that you don't have. He's not recruiting anymore, right? He's not having to train anymore. He's saving money by doing that for us. Chief Wallenstein only has 5 vacancies. That is the least that we've had in a very long time. So those cultures are changing, which means you're gonna start spending your personnel money. All right, so currently the budget's at 8.6% deficit. Possible considerations would be that transportation sales tax, that we keep it in the general fund instead of transferring it out.
When it transfers out, where does it go?
It goes to the roads capital fund
So for capital projects instead of
for Dan Murphy
operations.
projects, right? And a lot of it has to do with maintenance. It doesn't have to do with new construction.
So when they send that money to the city, where does it get deposited? Into the general fund account?
Yes,
Okay, and then, okay.
and then we transfer it out to wherever we decide that it's best appropriated. We could adjust personnel increases, which we're gonna go over here in a moment. I got a 10-minute warning, so I'm gonna hurry through those. We could adjust service levels. We could do a property tax increase. For every 1% property tax increase, you get $158,000. I strongly suggest inflationary tax increases for 2 reasons. Number one, you stay ahead of some of the 8 ball between personnel increase cost. And number 2, because you start that conversation with your residents through the truth in taxation process. It makes your budget much more open. It makes people pay more attention, even when it's only at 2%. Tends to start conversations. Sometimes that's negative in the beginning, but as time goes on, you see that it just becomes part of a normal process that you do on a regular basis. And talking points, there's no funding plan for any capital improvements or new staff. So all of these numbers have no new staff, and in fact, see some reductions. Here's what the general fund looks like. So 42% of the revenue comes from sales tax and 28% from property tax. And we fund about 59% to police and fire. So every dime of sales tax and a big portion of property tax only pay for public safety. You can kind of just see how that's apportioned out right there. All right, personnel.
Where does Parks fall? Is it under Public Works?
Under public works at 16%, parks and streets. Yep. All right, personnel. This is exactly what you were just asking, right? This is an FTE count. Historically, we took 2010, 2015, and 2020. So you can kind of see where we focused all of our resources. Community development needed to ramp up for all the development activity that's going on, and public safety has been ramped up. But you can see that there's been very little change otherwise.
Can you tell what FTE is?
I'm sorry, it's a full-time employee. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna skip that one. Let's talk about some prioritization. This is how we prioritized personnel funding. The first priority for us is to make sure that we can fund the retirement rate changes. URS has announced 2.7% plan rate increase for Tier 2 public safety. We've put that in the budget. The next thing was the legislation that also went through that increased Tier 2's public safety contribution by 2.5%. Now, the bill specifically said that that would be funded out by the employee. However, the state said then, but we're gonna fund ours for our guys, which really puts the pressure on cities to fund it as well. In other words, if that were to go through, this legislation were to go through, the police officer's paycheck would actually go down if we did not fund that. So we've put those in as a priority 1, and those are included in the numbers that I'm presenting tonight. Our health premium changed 7%. It's not bad, it's not double digits, thank goodness, and it's only on health. We had no other increases other than the health premium. Market adjustments, there's no cost to them this year. That would mean that people are changing ranges based on the market, but because they were currently being paid within that range, there's no increase to them at that time, but it gives them opportunity to earn more money over time. Cost of living adjustment, we need to talk about, and we might have to talk about it in another work session. The merit and steps plan. There's a steps plan for public safety at 5% per year for 8 years, and then they're topped out. And the city's merit program has been funded at 2.75% with a 14-year plan program going forward. These things, we've got some assumption that's in there in the numbers I'm giving you. These 2, we do not. We have no reclassifications, meaning that if we have 1 level employee, but we need maybe a next level up, or maybe we want to shift from one type of employee to another, there's none of that going on in any of these assumptions. And there are no new positions or increased service levels in any of our assumptions. I have 6 more minutes?
5.5.
3, okay.
I want time for some questions if possible.
Okay. Cost of living adjustment, this is kind of where I want input as well, right? So these are the most recent numbers. This one's actually came out February 13th. Bureau of Labor Statistics for the Western region, specifically Salt Lake area, 2.9% year over year. Okay. The CPI is 2.9. Dines Bank came out with one in January from November at 3.5%. Utah State Retirement is making a COLA for their retirees for this next year at 1.8%. The cost for every 0.5% to the city of cost of living is $211,500. We're proposing a 2.7% increase based on these numbers. Not as high as these numbers, and it's similar to what we did last year. It would mean it means $1 million to the general fund, and it means about $113,000 to the other utility funds. Any input on that?
Not here.
Okay. Okay. Wage and benefit adjustments. This is the cost of things that we are assuming in the budget. The baseline, which is if you change nothing. We added the retirement for the police, cost us $223,722 for those 2 changes that we discussed previously. Adding the medical premium of 7% increase is $317,000. If we were to do the 2.7% cost of living adjustment, it would be the $1 million we just spoke about. And if we fund, or if you fund the merit and step program for the employees to move through their ranges, that will cost almost $1 million, which changes $2.5 million from the baseline. Other funds, you can see the same thing, those same things, but the impact is much less just because of the number of employees. And public safety, quite candidly, is pretty heavy over here. Okay. Oh, I did it. Okay.
Where's the lottery ticket expenditure?
I know, where's the lottery ticket person, right? So I don't want to be a naysayer. I want us to come up with solutions. I want us to find what's the right way for us to get where we need to be? What's the right service levels, for us to be able to serve the residents? And what do you want for philosophies and policies and oversight? And how do you want to report back to your residents and your constituency how to best use it? So it's kind of just a primer for the budget as it's coming forward. There's a lot of information in a really short amount of time, but I welcome your input during this process, and we're going to continue to work towards trying to find more efficiency. Okay. Questions, comments?
So as Councilmember Whitelock mentioned, it's a delicate balance of not wanting to charge residents more under the assumption that we might need the money, but also, well, let's take the downturn economy, a little over a decade ago with failing tax revenue from sales tax, and then we need, basically people with the downturn economy, people had less money to spend, so we have less money, so now we need to charge them more money, but they have less money, and that's when everything goes crazy.
Yes.
And so I'd love to guard against a crisis situation, but since we can't, quote unquote, have a rainy day fund, but we want to be cautious, so it's that happy balance. So I guess it would be nice to know a couple of different contingencies if we did have this downturn. Where first should we go to decrease funding? Where would hierarchically be second and third? And I know everyone has a different idea of that, and everyone ran on a different platform of what should be funded first or second, but that might be a good conversation to have, of course, internally as council and also with mayor's staff. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Can I make one comment? There's no other council questions. One thing I hope you're starting to see is that the overall tax structure for cities is broken, frankly. Gas, electric, cable TV, cell phone, franchise taxes are all declining. Property tax, truth in taxation makes property tax generally flat in most cities until they can't possibly bear it anymore, and then they do a bigger jump than normal. And so cities as a whole become very dependent on sales tax, which is your most elastic revenue source and most likely to decrease. And sales tax as a tax source for cities is based on the sale of goods. But as we grow and progress as an economy, we buy less and less goods and we consume more and more services. We also buy more and more of our traditional goods over the internet, which doesn't have the same sales tax passed through the cities. And so all of our major revenue sources have challenges. But our expenses continue inflationary adjustments every year. So we're gonna have this same rough conversation each year as we start a budget.
Okay, don't put
This
this
isn't a
on the
one-time
agenda anymore then. This isn't fun.
Oh, we'll just exclude corporate.
Hey,
Well, I'm a proponent, yes, I'm not kicking the can down the road and doing that large increase of a water rate or a property tax. You're right, smart, sustainable, where it's keeping pace with the population and inflation and costs of goods and services.
I'm in favor of inflationary property tax. Look at it every year, just because of the way the system is set up. You have to. It shouldn't be called a tax increase. It should be called avoiding a tax decrease.
Well, you
And
gotta
we-
talk to those people that you're subservient to on the Hill.
and
We are
that was
at our,
difficult.
we're at our time and we do need the full 15 minutes so that we can be set up to rebroadcast. So we will adjourn the work session and reconvene at 7 o'clock in council chamber. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Let's find more sensitive tax.
Problem is,
I can't hear anything.
Kayleen,